Hello, welcome to Microfiche Microphone. I'm Micah, and on this channel we look at microfiche from the past, old newspaper articles in the public domain. We look at them with our modern eyes, our modern perspective, and see what we can learn from them. On this microfiche time capsule, we are looking back at the Juvenile Instructor from the 15th of May, 1900. And this article is entitled Lives of Our Leaders, the Apostles, Francis M. Lyman. So we are continuing our series on the lives of our leaders. This was a whole article series, if you can't tell with how many videos I've already done. So this one is on Francis M. Lyman. What do I know about him? So I know that he was kind of a traveling apostle. He used to visit all of the states and speak at state conferences. And back then they used to do them quarterly instead of half a year. And it's just really interesting because I believe he also had a very close relationship with the Native American population in the area. So I'm a little concerned that this article might be a little bit on the racist side. I do know that because of the language barrier, sometimes Native Americans ended up getting spoken down to like children, which was super frustrating. But another thing about him was that his father and his son were both apostles. His father was Amasa M. Lyman, who got excommunicated for preaching false doctrine. And his son was Richard R. Lyman, who also got excommunicated, but for polygamy in the 1940s. Anyways, so, he was the only one of the three who didn't. So I feel like he ought to be at least remembered for that. But let's find out. Now, full disclosure, I actually have read this before. A while back, I did a project on writing articles on each of like 20 least known apostles, and Francis M. Lyman was on the list. They're up on my website if you are interested. They never got published for real, although I did try, like in a book. That didn't work out. But that's okay. Also, my voice is a bit scratchy. I've been fighting the flu for 2 weeks and then right immediately afterwards got a cold. And I refuse to stop working because I have a cold. Because I was, I got through the flu and it's just lingering. So it's taking too long to go away. So I decided I was going to record anyway. Let's take a look at the actual article. Men and women of middle age in the church remember Francis M. Lyman and John Henry Smith, just as the boys and girls of 16 to 20 will remember Matthias F. Cowley and Abraham O. Woodruff. And the irony of saying that is that nobody today remembers any of those four people. That's okay. The latter are the first apostles of your time, as Francis Marion and his companion in call to the apostleship were the first to the young people of 1880. Who would that be equivalent of today? Garrett W. Gong? Yeah? I guess. Ulysses Suarez. Or Patrick Curran. That's the most recent one. Did you ever notice how much more difficult it is to regard contemporaries with the same feelings that you look upon older people? However, there is no reason, all other qualifications being equal, why an apostle called in our own day from our own companions should not seem as great to us as one whose call to that holy office antedates our recollection. But somehow age often creates the indifference. The men of our own time seem more human, more full of the same qualities, the same feelings that we ourselves possess, and are not separated by that mystic line beyond which distance lends enchantment. What are you waffling on about? This is really kind of boring. The reason that we don't identify with people we are not familiar with is because we're not familiar with them, yeah? That's the only reason, in my opinion. The young may well love and respect Apostle Lyman for his age, but the love of his contemporaries for him arises from his intense humanity, because he is with them and of them and for them very like them. And so, young and old, the denizens on either side of the line of years reach out in trusting confidence to him as a man of God, a man among men. This is a station difficult to occupy, an eminence hard to hold, a position which only a well-balanced mind inspired by the Holy Ghost can hope to maintain successfully. Apostle Lyman is preeminently a teacher and an organizer. Having successfully passed the middle age of life, which is the testing ground of character and strength, he remains full of that spiritual force so necessary in impressing the saints in matters both spiritual and temporal, and with it he carries an abundance of practicality and common sense so essential in battling with the problems of existence and the cold business propositions of everyday intercourse. He is active and energetic, always filling a mission, jovial, full of quaint epigrams, kind but not easily moved to tears, a stoic concerning death. Okay, sorry, I misread that. A stoic concerning death, which he looks upon as a sweet comfort to the faithful. That's a touch dismissive, but okay. As a judge between men, he succeeds not only in giving satisfactory decisions, but also in reconciling the brethren. His ability in these lines comes more from the impressions of the moment than from any special study of the subject. Indeed, his motto is, I set no stakes, but seek for the inspiration of the occasion. His early career is full of pioneer incidents and frontier activity. He was born at the town of Good Hope, McDonough County, Illinois, on January 12, 1840. In the spring following, the family removed into Iowa and then to Nauvoo in the spring of 1841, and later in 1843 to Alkena, Fayette County, Indiana, returning to Nauvoo after the martyrdom of the prophet and patriarch in 1844. He was the eldest son of Amasa Mason Lyman and Louisa Maria Tanner, to whom he was sealed in the Nauvoo Temple by Presidents Brigham Young and H.C. Kimball in January 1846. Yeah, see? Amasa and Lyman. His father had gone west with the pioneers, and it was not until June of that year that he, with his mother and 3 other children, all in care of his grandfather, John Tanner, left for the rendezvous of the saints at winter quarters on the Missouri. On the first day of July, 1848, he was baptized in the Elkhorn by his father, who also confirmed him. He was only a lad of 8 years, but on the journey to the valley that summer he drove a yoke of cattle and a wagon to the mountains, arriving in Great Salt Lake on the 19th of October. Here he spent the next 3 years in such vocations and sports as were the lot of the children of the pioneers. He was given what opportunities there were for education during this time, which added slightly to the store of meager information already obtained in winter quarters. His father, with Elder C.C. Rich, purchased a ranch in San Bernardino, California, which was intended as a temporary home, as well as an outfitting point for the gathering saints, and so in 1851, with the family, he migrated thither, doing a man's duty in driving loose stock the whole distance from Utah. From this time on, for several years, he was employed principally in handling animals and in freighting between Utah and California, making during these years 16 trips over the deserts between the two places. He attended school in San Bernardino during the winter months, and also found time to work some 18 months at the joiner's trade with Thomas W. Whitaker. He was also a witness to the laying of the cornerstone of the Salt Lake Temple in April 1853. It was decided in the spring of 1857 that he should go on an English mission, but the Buchanan War prevented. He reached Salt Lake on his way, but was then delegated to return to the coast and move his father's family to the valley. All the missionaries, as well as the colony in California, being called to Utah. Yeah, Buchanan War, if you're not familiar, was a time when, for whatever reason, John Buchanan, who was the president at the time, decided that that the Mormons were starting an insurrection and like building an army against the American government, and so he sent the army to quell the rebellion. And luckily, it didn't come to a battle, but it was a pretty close thing a couple times. And so during that time, the president of the church asked the people to come home so that they could kind of keep themselves safe. Yeah, so that was during 1857, 1858. Then eventually they left and everything kind of returned to normal. But so yeah, that's what that was about. Apparently he moved his father's family from California to Utah. Also, the colony at San Bernardino was a thing. The church purchased quite a large plot of land, and they had a little colony there. And, yeah, I mean, they eventually dissolved it, but that was a thing at the time. The English mission, however, was filled 3 years later, May 1st, 1860, at which date his active public life may be said to have had its beginning. Okay, although previous to this time he had been ordained an elder by his father in California in 1856. had accompanied his father's exploring party to the Colorado in 1858, had been ordained a 70 January 7, 1860, in Farmington, whither he removed to till his father's farm in 1859, and was president of the Young Men's Literary Association in Farmington in the first winter months of 1860. All right, so a quick rundown. Previous to his departure for England, he built a log room in Beaver, whither he removed his wife Rhoda Ann Taylor, to whom he was married November 18, 1857, and his one child. Okay, so far, one wife. I'm pretty sure he has more afterwards. On his way east, he visited Kirtland and was shown through the temple by Martin Harris. He left New York on the steamer Edinburgh, and while we have him on the sea, let us ask the boys and girls to look back over the life of the boy of 20 years and see what he has accomplished. Okay. I understand this is written for children, but that was a bit juvenile. All right. What an astonishing record of activity and work. Frontiersman at birth and babyhood, pioneer, teamster, and bullwhacker at 8, herdsman and cowboy at 11, learning a trade at 13, plowing the trackless deserts as a leader and captain at 16, married at 17, wow, that's young, exploring the wilds of Colorado at 18, a 70 and a missionary at 20, with farming, attending school, presiding over improvement associations, building the log cabin of a pioneer, as incidents thrown here and there in between. Landing in Liverpool, July 27, 1860, his missionary labors were prosecuted with vigor. In the course of a couple years, he was released, and with a company of more than 800 immigrants, he sailed for America, arriving in New York, June 25, 1862, after 42 tedious days on the ocean. He was appointed second counselor in the presidency of the company, but 2 weeks out he was compelled to take entire charge. He was put in charge of the company in New York and took them safely to Florence, where they arrived early in July. 2 months were spent there and on the road, and it was not until the middle of October when they arrived at his humble log cabin in Beaver, after an absence of over 2 years and a half. Okay, his child's not going to recognize him. In March of the following year, he was asked by President Young to settle in Fillmore, Millard County, which was once intended to be the capital of the territory. He removed thither, and from that time on, for more than 14 years, until June 1877, he became a leader in political, church business, and manufacturing enterprises of that county. Only a few of the more important of these can be named. He was Assistant Assessor of United States Internal Revenue, Lieutenant Colonel of the 1st Regiment of Militia in the Pauvan District at the age of 25 years, member of the House of the General Assembly of the State of Deseret, a member of the 17th, 18th, 22nd, and 23rd sessions of the Territorial Legislature, County Clerk and Recorder, Superintendent of Schools, and Prosecuting Attorney. When the stake was organized March 9, 1869, he was ordained a high priest and was later set apart as high counselor. With his father, he built, owned, and operated the O.K. Flouring Mills, engaging in the flour and grain trade and other enterprises, being also secretary and treasurer of the county cooperative companies, doing also the most of the business in connection with the land entries, preemptions, homesteads, and town sites in that county. It was while residing here that he received to wife, October 4th, 1869, Clara Caroline Callister. 3 C's, huh? Received to wife is a very strange phrase, as if he had been gifted a person. I don't like the phrase. I'm hoping very, very much that Clara wanted to marry him, yeah, and that he wanted to marry her, yeah, in both directions. I do not like that. He received to wife. You're not gifted people, huh? His second mission to England was also taken while his home was in Millard. He left Salt Lake on October 20, 1873, and arrived in Liverpool on the 12th day of November. While on this mission, in addition to his labors in England, he made tours of Wales, Scotland, Denmark, Germany, Switzerland, and France. With a company of 300 saints, he returned, arriving in New York September 26, and at his home in Fillmore on the 11th of October. And it wasn't gone that long. It sounds more like he only went to, lead the saints back, yeah? He was not quiet long, for in 1877, after having attended the dedication of the St. George Temple in April, he was called to preside over the Tooele stake, which was organized June 24, 1877. From this time on, for 3 years, his name stands at the head of the affairs of that stake and county, religiously and politically. It was in August of that year, following that he was elected county recorder and also representative to the legislature from Tooele County. The Liberal Party had held control of that county since 1874, but in 1878 the legislature passed an act providing for the registration of voters, which was a death blow to the so-called Tooele Republic and to the methods which had enabled the Liberals to retain control so long. Why would that be the case? The legislature passed an act providing for the registration of voters. Is that not a good thing? I mean, if more people are registered to vote, then you have more people voting, and that's how the Liberal Party lost control? That's weird. Why were they in control if they weren't the majority? I'm just saying. By corrupt means, a small minority had conspired to control the county, and in doing so had spent in 4 years the revenue of a balance of $5,000, and left the county in debt $16,000 in addition. In the August election, all the People's Party candidates were elected, but the Liberal officers refused to count the votes at first, and then by a system of technicalities at length declared the People's Party candidates not elected, although their majority averaged over 300 votes. It was then that the fighting qualities of the new legislator, Honorable F.M. Lyman, manifested themselves. A notice of contest was promptly given, and proceedings were taken before the district court to compel an honest count. It was not until the 29th of March the year following, on peremptory order of the court, the case then having been to the Supreme Court, that the officers in charge declared the correct results of the election, which gave the offices to the people's candidates who filed their bonds and entered upon their duties. As he had always been, so in this instant he became a terror to the wrongdoer. I like that. He really fought for democracy then. Yeah? I did not remember that detail. But, yeah, that's really interesting. All right. In August 1880, Elder Lyman with a company made a tour of southern Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico, and it was while away on this mission that he was chosen one of the 12 apostles at the General Conference, October 10, 1880. He was ordained on the 27th by President John Taylor. From that time on, he has been completely devoted to church work. His travels embrace nearly every city, town, and village in the West, where there is a church organization. Told you. Yeah, he visited all the states. He is a familiar figure in the conferences of the saints. He keeps a minute daily record of his travels and his journals, which are written to date and embrace the whole history of his life, and frequently consulted for important data relating to individuals in the church. By common consent, he is the keeper of the genealogical records of his father's family, and as such carefully enters every important item relating to marriages, births, and deaths therein, having a prepared blank for the needed information. In this respect, he is an example which some one person in all of their families, large or small, would do well to emulate. His extensive and continuous labors stamp him as one of the energetic men of the church, a minute man in very deed. Yeah, I remember him being called a minute man. It was in the early part of the year 1883 that Apostle Lyman filled an Indian mission, to which he had been called by President John Taylor on November 17th in the year previous. On May 5th and 6th, he attended the Wasatch Conference in Heber City, where he made the necessary preparations for the journey eastward to the Utes in Uinta. The company camped in Strawberry Valley, where they were joined by others from San Pete, who had been compelled to leave their supplies in the wagon on the top of the mountain in 4 feet of snow. Oh, sucks. As a guard, they had left Indian Nephi by the wagon. Okay, I'm assuming that's a person. Strange way of wording it. Strong efforts were made to get the goods, and while this work was being done, the company remained on Current Creek. It was while thus encamped that Apostle Lyman took his gun one day and went to the mountains some 2 miles distant. When this mission had been assigned to him, President Taylor had not given any definite instructions as to how the work was to be accomplished, and the method to be pursued was not clear to Brother Lyman. He had also asked President Woodruff in the Quorum of the 12 how to proceed, but had not received any detailed counsel that left his mind free from doubt as to the right course. He had been told that he was personally entitled to a knowledge of the work and the spirit of his mission. Should he go right in among the Indians, or should he ask permission of the agents? In the latter course, he ran the risk of being refused, thus leaving his work unaccomplished, as was the case with others who had asked permission to preach to the Indians and other missions. Arriving at the mountains, these thoughts were employing his mind when a sudden impulse caused him to ascend the hill, which towered 1,000 feet above the tableland in the vicinity. On arriving at the top, he found a large flat stone which he stood upon. He then took off his hat, his face turned to the east towards the field of his labors, fell upon his knees, and poured out his soul in prayer to God. I went before the Lord and told him all about my troubles, how everything seemed against us, how little I knew about the work, how I had learned that the agents of Uinta and Ouray were bitterly opposed to the Mormons and their doctrines, and then asked for the successful opening of the mission to the Lamanites in that region, and that God might guide me aright and soften the hearts of the agents with favor towards us and our cause. Just as he kneeled to pray, the atmosphere having been perfectly quiet up to that moment, a wind began blowing, which continued to grow stronger as he continued his prayer, until at the close of the half hour in which he was engaged it blew with the velocity of a tempest, so that he could scarcely remain in his position. When he finished praying, the wind as suddenly abated as it had begun, and he retraced his steps to the camp. He felt convinced that to go right on with his mission, visit the agents and the Indians, and preach to them was the right thing to do. This ability to receive impressions of approbation in his work when he is doing right is strongly developed in Apostle Lyman. In many of the important steps of his life he has been approved through dreams and inspirations, even visits of men of God who have gone before. It has been thus made perfectly clear to him that his course is approved and his actions upheld. These visits and inspirations have been a source of great comfort to him. So in this instance, while he saw no vision, he was strongly impressed with the idea, "Go ahead, you're on the right track." He felt that his troubles and obstacles would be like the wind, perhaps strong, but soon over with. And so it occurred. But he scarcely looked for such a terrible personal affliction as was to come upon him. On the 11th of May, he engaged with the men in lassoing some wild horses that had been brought into the camp. He was an expert at this business, and could lay a rope around the front feet of an animal to perfection, often taking 10 in a stretch without a miss. On the morning of the 12th, the camp was up early, and it appeared that all the difficulties which had so far surrounded them were at length overcome. He was sitting on a camp stool just before breakfast and reached over to pick up some object when he was suddenly seized with the most excruciating pain that could be imagined in his left side. It was a threatened rupture. It was so severe and agonizing that all hopes of his recovery were given up. Everything that could be done was done to relieve him, but all to no avail. They had no medicines of any kind. One of the brethren proffered to send some 50 miles away for a doctor, but Brother Lyman forbade him, saying that he could not last till the arrival of a physician. It was suggested that he be taken back, but it was impossible to move him. The pain was so tormenting. For 2 hours he remained in such terrible agony that the cold sweat stood out in great beads upon his face. During this time he says that every good act of his life passed before him, and strange to say, not an evil thing that he had done came to his mind. Nothing but good. He saw himself carried home dead, and beheld the consternation of his family at his death, and what had overtaken him. During all this time, strange to say, neither he nor his companions, although they had done every other thing to alleviate his suffering, had once thought of the ordinance of administration. It never once entered my mind, he said, nor did the brethren think of it. At the close of that time, one of the brethren suggested administering to him, which was accordingly done. No sooner were the hands of his brethren lifted from his head than the pain left as suddenly as it had come. He became perfectly free, and had thus been healed by the power of God, by the laying on of hands by the elders. Then, he says, I thought, how good it is to only be free from pain. It is the greatest heaven of all, and yet the most of our lives we are free, but scarcely appreciate it. He fell into a sweet sleep, and in a comparatively short time was able to proceed on the journey. Yeah, I do remember this story. It sounds like a blood clot to me. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, if anybody has a better suggestion on what it could be. Clearly he didn't die of it, but that's scary, especially in the 1880s, I think it was. Like, what are you going to do about it, you know? I mean, back then, even if you knew it was a blood clot, there's nothing you could do. You just suffer, you know, and then you die. Sounds fun, right? No. Anyways. Up to this time, Satan seemed determined that the mission should not be opened up, but from this time on, the trouble was over. The way was clear, everything was favorable, and it seemed that every obstacle was removed without hands. Arriving among the Indians, the missionaries were received with marked kindness by both the Lamanites and by the agents. J. Critchlow of Uinta and J. F. Minnis of Ouray. Everybody attended the meetings. The Gospel and the Book of Mormon were freely taught by Elder Lyman and his brethren, and by Elder Nephi, who was surnamed Lehi by Elder Lyman. Nephi-Lehi, huh? Chief Tabby also preached, together with many others of the chief Utes from the firm Latter-day Saints, who were firm Latter-day Saints, okay. They bore powerful and fearless testimonies. Missionaries were selected, sustained, and set apart at a conference in Ashley on the 19th and 20th of May, and were called to continue the labors, which they did with much spirit. They were Jeremiah Hatch, Israel Clark, Jeremiah Hatch Jr., Thomas Caron, George Glynis, and Thomas Bingham Jr. The Indians were largely converted and baptized, and both chiefs and laymen rejoiced in the word of God. Temporal good was also accomplished. The missionaries found an old chief who was more interested in temporal than in spiritual affairs. He had arranged a canal straight up the banks of the river to his land, and was waiting for the water to mount into it to irrigate his possessions. The missionaries remonstrated with him, saying that the water would not run uphill. He insisted, however, in a surly manner that the Mormons made it run uphill. It was explained to him that it was only the appearance that it seemed to do so, and that water ran only downhill. They told him how it could be done, whereupon he wished them to do the work. They asked permission from the agent to build a canal to water the possessions of the old chief, which was gladly granted. Can you imagine? No, you have to make the river run up to my place. And he's like, dude, your place is uphill of the river. What the flip are we supposed to do? And they're like, I think you could do it. No, you should do it. Great. The 6 missionaries set to work upon their task. They obtained plows, scrapers, and horses, and in the course of 10 days they had a canal ready, which proved a great success in watering the possessions of the elated chief. Well, good for them. Congratulations. That's impressive, I'm not going to lie. For this useful labor, the missionaries were afterward allowed $1,000, which was paid them by Agent Minnis, and which they divided among them, thus receiving both temporal and spiritual blessings. Apostle Lyman returned to Provo from his successful mission on the 28th of May of the same year. Francis Marion Lyman is one of the most active workers in the church. His position as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, as a member of the Sunday School Union Board, and the General Board of Young Men's Mutual Improvement Associations brings him in direct contact with the people, young and old, in the organized stakes of Zion. His nature permits no offered opportunity to pass unimproved, to associate and counsel with the community. He has particular ability in the line of counsel among the saints. His bearing and conduct impress the people favorably, and then they often listen to him when men of less genius in these lines would be spurned. He has a remarkable capacity for saying unpleasant things in a very acceptable way, and further he possesses a special gift of reconciliation. If men who are enemies, especially in a public way, cannot be reconciled to each other by Apostle Lyman, it would be better that both should retire from public service, for they are of a class who, for their sake of peace and advancement, should never be leaders among the people. Brother Lyman exemplifies perfectly the 6th beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. He is naturally an adjuster of difficulties, and hence in very deed a child of God. He takes his own methods, however, in the accomplishment of his ends of peace. He does not always use mild words and pleasant persuasion. He is a fighter, if needs be. But his skirmishes are conducted under the inspiration of the Spirit of God. No man is more under the influence of the gentle spirit of peace breathed forth in the life of the Master, yet neither is there a man more imbued with those other qualities of the Savior, which could justly cause him to exclaim, Thou hypocrite, first cast out the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearer to cast out the mote out of thy brother's eye. Or, Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! Ye serpents, ye generation of vipers, how can ye escape the damnation of hell? A striking characteristic of Brother Lyman is his ability to say something to the people, young and old, who meet him. It is a delight to shake hands with him, for he is seemingly loath to let you go until he has given you expression to some pointed word or sentence that will cause you to think. He always has something good to say, and usually says it looking you straight in the eyes. These expressions are mostly agreeable, but sometimes not so pleasant, in which latter case you may be sure you are off the track he sees ahead. A cyclopedia of valuable epigrams would be these seemingly extemporaneous sentences, could they be taken as they come from his lips to various persons. They always come in place and are especially meant for and applicable to the person spoken to, and if he could discern one's needs and circumstances. I had the distinction of being set apart by him for a foreign mission some years ago, and received a blessing, which was a source of great comfort to me and to my wife and family. At this time I was appointed to take charge of the company of missionaries to our fields of labor. Being totally inexperienced, I ventured to ask, "What, Brother Lyman, is my duty?" "Your main duty," was the hurried reply, his rather small but piercing deep-set gray eyes covered with heavy lashes, staring me full in the face, "is to see that none of them are lost." The unexpected and queer answer chagrined me, but proved to be just right, as was fully demonstrated before we were all packed aboard the old Nevada. "How old are you?" he said at another time. "Just 35 years. 35, he repeated. "You have just 10 more years to work hard in, and you ought to be a-doing. And after that you will begin to hang back and take it easy. And if you don't do more than you seem to be now doing, you may not be able to gratify yourself." Meeting him once on a train before I had any idea that he knew me well enough for recognition, he grasped me by the hand and said, "Are you extravagant?" "No, sir." "Good thing for you," he said, and went right on. Brother Lyman is as fond of practical jokes as any person alive, frequently shows tact in this species of amusement. One day, while he resided in Millard, he insisted upon dining at a friend's house. "But," said his friend, "the folks are not prepared." "Well, you go to dinner, do you not?" said he, "and I'll take just what you get." It was finally agreed, and the two started for dinner, his friend having some misgivings as to the result. On nearing the friend's home, they found that the blinds were drawn, there was no fire, the door was locked. No dinner, of course. "Did your wife know you were coming to dinner?" "Surely." "And this is the way your folks treat you?" "You ought to reorganize the government of your family," said Lyman twittingly. "I'll tell you," he continued. "Now you may come down to my place, and I'll show you how I am treated." They went, and upon arrival it was found that Brother Lyman had invited his friend's family to dinner. They were all there, and a sumptuous repast awaited the company. He had taken this method to throw his friend off his guard. That's kind of mean, but it's funny, yeah? That's kind of a nice prank, I can get behind a prank like that. One day this friend had occasion to visit him during dinner hour. He came to the door, knocked, it was opened by one of the family. He was invited in, shown a seat, took it, and was asked to have a word with Brother Lyman. All this time Brother Lyman never looked up nor said a word, but kept on eating. His friend spoke to him, but he ate all the more earnestly without saying a word. Relations were becoming strained. Suddenly Lyman said to one of his daughters, "Give me the Bible, please." It was done. "Turn to Proverbs 25:17 and show it to Brother whatever." He continued. The friend read, "Withdraw thy foot from thy neighbor's house, lest he be weary of thee, and so hate thee." The friend appreciated the situation as a joke. Then there were greetings and handshaking such as only Apostle Lyman can give. If everybody had done that to me, I would have left. Yeah? I'm like, "Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I'll go." Remember, there was no phones back then, so it's not like he could have called. When he was a local leader in Tooele County, some government official sent him a request to answer, among many other inquiries, the question, "Who is the heaviest sheep owner in your county?" He replied, "I am. I weigh 280 pounds. Other questions will be answered upon receipt of $2. The official replied, enclosing $2, saying that Lyman's reply was discourteous and that he was obliged to pay the amount out of his own pocket, but at the same time enclosing a government voucher to be signed and returned. Lyman sent a private receipt and returned the voucher unsigned. It is said of some men that they are easily approached. Of Apostle Lyman, one may truly say he does not wait to be approached. He speaks and greets you first, and always has a word to say that is well to think of and remember. You can't help but like him, even though he tells you things that ought to displease you. No man is more spiritual-minded than Apostle Lyman. I think he stands among the first in the quorum of the 12 in this respect. In this spirituality, combined with his particular tact, judgment, foresight, and ability to read the feelings of men, that enables him to adjust temporal affairs between brethren with such dispatch and satisfaction, and to touch the hearts of the people, turning their thoughts with tears of repentance to God and his gospel. And now, if Apostle Lyman could speak to all the readers of the Juvenile Instructor, what would he say? Something in this vein. Boys and girls, be pure in thoughts and actions. Do nothing that will make you feel ashamed to face any good person in the world. This course will make you free and happy. There is no other bondage so heavy as the bondage of sin, no other freedom so delightful as the freedom of innocence and purity. Guard your good name and your happiness by determining to be free from sin. Protect your innocence by thinking pure thoughts. Shield your purity by noble actions. Edward H. Anderson. All right. I'm not quite sure what to say about that. I'm not a big fan of the pranks and stuff and standoffishness. I don't know. I feel like I would be put off by that, but, you know, I guess it doesn't matter since I never met him in person. All right. Now, I told you I wrote an article about him. I'm not going to read the whole article. It would be longer than this one. So I'm going to skip down to the bottom, which is kind of my conclusion. Yeah. I have articles on 20 different apostles. So if we happen to stumble across one, I will go ahead and read my conclusion that I came to. And it's very heavily cited. You can find it on historicalgeneralconferences.weebly.com and then look under people and then find the person you're looking for. So in case you're interested in looking that up. Anyway, this is my conclusion. So what kind of man was Elder Francis M. Lyman? He was the best kind. He was a man who practiced what he preached. He was a man who never stopped working for the good of the kingdom of God. He was a man who cared about people very deeply. He cared not only for his dear family, as evidenced by his care for the spiritual welfare of his father, but also for the members of the church and for all people in general as well. He encouraged everyone to pray for their enemies as well as their friends. He remained faithful through the trials of his father's apostasy, the abolishment of plural marriage, and losing several fellow apostles to the manifesto on plural marriage and politics. Nothing ever shook his faith. He was a rock of faith and conviction. He was truly converted to the gospel with his whole heart. He was surely a pure example to follow. I kind of feel like that sums it up, but also in the article I used a lot more sources. This is only a single source, which is why I'm alluding to some things I didn't mention. So, not important, I'm not going to go into it. Like I said, you can read the article if you really want to read it, but that was my main conclusion. Another thing I like to do is I like to pick out a scripture which I think kind of is attached to the same sentiment as the article. And so this one was, "And I will make him great in mine eyes, for he shall do my work." 2 Nephi 3:8. I feel like Francis M. Lyman was a worker. He was someone who was really willing to get up and roll up his sleeves, and get something done. And I really admire that about him. Anyways, also the fact that his faith was absolutely unmovable. I find that very impressive. Like, most people are not that sure in themselves. But he was. And he always said that he was. And I find that very admirable. So, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this Microfiche time capsule today about Francis M. Lyman. I hope you learned something. And if you did, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and I hope to see you in the next video.